Thank you. Okay. Shall I start speaking?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you also to my friend and comrade Viju for giving that excellent introduction, which saves me a lot of effort in contextualizing the whole discussion. He has done that very ably, and I can directly jump into the topic that we have at hand today. Now, the topic that we are discussing today is the question of three agricultural acts that were passed by the parliament. By the way, I had made a promise to the organizers that I would speak in Malayalam, but I'm told by many who are actually watching it on Facebook and so on, that there are a lot of non-Malayalam speakers also probably watching in, and I should speak in English. അതുകൊണ്ട് മലയാളത്തിൽ ഞാൻ സംസാരിക്കുമെന്ന് പ്രതീക്ഷിച്ചിരുന്ന എല്ലാവരോടും എനിക്ക് ക്ഷമ ചോദിക്കണം. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ സംസാരിക്കാനായിട്ട് എന്നെ അനുവദിക്കുക, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരുപാട് പേര് ചിലപ്പോൾ പോയേക്കാം നിങ്ങളുടെ ലൈവിൽ നിന്ന്. So allow me to speak in English. So the problem that we are discussing today is the three acts of the central government passed by the parliament in September. Now, I would like to begin the discussion on these acts from a particular historical context, which is the context of 1960s in India, when all these interventions were in some sense initiated by the central government and state governments in India. In the 1960s, as you're aware, though India did not implement land reform, though India had very little progress in rural education, rural healthcare, nutrition, and so on, rural infrastructure, and so on, the one thing that we did in rural areas was Green Revolution, which was a technological package to begin with, but which allowed India to move from a situation of what is usually called as a ship-to-mouth existence or a ship-to-table existence, which is depending on the United States' PL 480 program for wheat imports and so on, wheat food in the form of food aid. From there, we moved into a situation of food security in production, not distribution, but production by the end of the 1980s. And that was largely driven by the Green Revolution package of post-1965. Now, often it is assumed that the Green Revolution package was a technological package alone, and often it is not appreciated that it came with a lot of institutional reforms as well. But unfortunately, these institutional reforms were not of agrarian relations, as we in the left would expect it to be, but it was in the form of creating new institutions to generally help agriculture, to support farmers who are buying new seeds, buying fertilizers, buying pesticides, using more water, using more electricity, diesel, etc. So there was a regime that was created in the rural economy in order to protect farmers, to support farmers participating in the Green Revolution package. And that is where the historical context behind these two acts actually lies. So in the post-1965 period, India created a number of public institutions to support farmers. What were these kinds of support? There were different kinds of support. There was support in the form of prices. There was support in the form of subsidies. There was support in the form of credit. There was support in the form of marketing. There was support in the form of research, public research, and there was support in the form of public extension, agricultural extension. So these were multiple interventions of the public sector that came in during that time, public sector and the government, that were introduced in the 1960s to support agriculture. So what happened? We are concerned here with only two of these. I'm not going to deal with others, which is one is the question of price support, and the other is a question of marketing support. Of the six that I listed. There were others, like, for example, credit support. The nationalization of banks in 1969 was an important effort to take banking to rural areas. Those were other steps, but I'm not getting into that. First is price support. What is price support? The government created a new supply chain in agricultural marketing, which is beginning from the farmer at the one end and ending at the consumer at the other end. One of the key problems with Green Revolution, given that it was implemented in the absence of land reform, was that the benefits of Green Revolution were unequally distributed geographically in India. For example, if you take the first 10 or 15 years of Green Revolution, something like 2/3 of the additional production that came because of Green Revolution came from Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP. These three regions contributed 2/3 of the incremental production in food grains. This meant that there was some surplus regions and many other deficit regions. Kerala is, for example, is a classic example of a deficit region, which required import of food grains from the central pool to feed its population. So this meant that a national food policy was drafted where the government would procure food from the farmers on the one end, run it through institutions like Food Corporation of India, which will be in charge of procurement and stocking these grains, would transport it to state civil supplies corporations in the states, and from there it would provide it to consumers in these deficit states at an issue price. So, and the difference between the economic cost of handling the grain and the issue price will form the food subsidy, which will be met from the budget of the central government. So this was the larger the outline of the national food policy laid out at that time. So for this purpose of procurement from the end of the farmer, Food Corporation of India was established in 1965. There was another institution established in 1965 called the Agricultural Prices Commission, APC, which was later renamed as the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices, CACP, sometime in 1985 or so. This institution of CACP or APC at that time would announce two prices. One would be support price, the other would be procurement price. Now, this distinction between support price and procurement price doesn't quite exist. They have been merged into what we today call in common parlance as MSP or minimum support price. Basically, what happens is the government, by announcing a support price, is creating a floor for prices. If the MSP declared is 10 rupees per kilogram, the government is saying that if the market price falls below 10 rupees per kilogram, you can come to me. I will buy it at 10 rupees per kilogram. That is the promise that the government makes to the farmer with the announcement of the support price. Procurement price is slightly conceptually different, where the government is buying or purchasing food grains from the farmers in the surplus states using Food Corporation of India as the institutional mechanism, and then transferring it to the deficit states for distribution through the public distribution system or ration shops. So this sort of long mechanism from the surplus states to the deficit states, intermediated by institutions like CACP, FCI, and announcements of MSP, that is support price and procurement price, was one important support given to the farmers during the Green Revolution period. This is primarily because this was provided to the farmers as an incentive to adopt these new technologies, which were on the other hand expensive. So farmer needed some kind of price security, price assurance to adopt these technologies and invest in them. That was the primary idea behind these interventions. So that is about price support. The second kind of support that was introduced from the 1960s was related to the marketing sector. Prior to this, you had in the rural areas, farmers were large and small, both kinds of farmers, largely sold to itinerant village traders who basically operated completely unregulated. They had links with the feudal elements in the rural areas, primarily the landlords. They were completely unregulated. They never gave the farmer full information about the prices. They never paid the farmer a remunerative price. They used false weights and measures, non-standardized weights and measures. So invariably, what they would bring in as a 1 kg weight would actually be only 800 gram or 900 gram and not more than that. So these kinds of frauds happened in the weights and measures sphere. Farmers were also not quite aware of did not possess accurate information about the market conditions as to how the price trends are moving and so on. No information was there with the farmer. So the farmer was largely exploited in the rural areas in the realm of marketing and trading. It is in order to ameliorate or address this problem that the whole APMC system was thought of. That is, Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee system was thought of, which are largely regulated markets. These regulated markets were established in the states by every state or most states passing what are called as APMC acts in the state assemblies. Remember, it was not a central law. It was passed in the state assemblies as APMC acts from around 1969 onwards. What did these APMC acts in states do? To begin with, why was it done? Because agriculture is a state subject, and even agricultural marketing is actually falling under, even if you look at intrastate agricultural trade, it is largely coming under the state list. Only interstate comes under the union list. So these acts were largely passed in the states from 1969 onwards. What did these acts do? These acts primarily established regulated markets, or what we call as mandis in large parts of North India. What you do here is that the regulated markets provided the farmer with accurate price information as to what the prices were, what were the trends in prices. The prices will be publicly displayed at the gate of the APMC market. Farmer could come there. He could actually auction his produce to and he could sell to that trader who provides a better price to him or her. If the price is low today and it is expected to rise tomorrow, there's something like a guest house facility for the farmer where he could stay there overnight and then sell the produce the next year, the next day. So all these facilities were standardized weights and measures were used in these APMC mandis. So the farmer was provided with an ecosystem, a marketing environment where much of the earlier exploitative tendencies on the hands of the trader were actually now weakened to a large extent, and the farmer was able to market his produce in a much transparent atmosphere, much less exploitative ecosystem. That was what the APMC mandis did to the sector of marketing. Now, that is the other important intervention. So on the one hand, you had a national food policy which connected the surplus and deficit states through FCI, CSCP, support price, consumer price, PDS, etc. On the other hand, you had the creation of the marketing system called APMC mandis. Now, this is the historical context in which we have to examine the three acts. Now, this continued till about the 1980s, end of 1980s. By the end of the 1980s and early 1990s, there were a large number of arguments which were raised against this kind of marketing system that prevailed, largely coming from World Bank, IMF, and also economists who today would be called as neoliberal economists of that kind. And they wanted this reform of the agricultural marketing and agriculture itself to be a big component of the liberalization program after 1991. That is the context in which we have to now move into. And that's where the whole the history of these acts actually lies. So it was argued, let's take the two interventions that I spoke about, MSP system on the one hand and APMC mandi system on the other hand. So the first point made was MSPs are largely increase inflation in the economy, and as a result, they are actually harmful to the consumer. So that is one set of arguments that were provided. Another set of arguments were provided, which is that MSPs actually promote inefficient trading. You are not allowing the farmer to sell openly in the market and probably get a better price that the market provides. MSPs, the system of MSP, the system of procurement to be more precise, acts as an obstruction to the farmers obtaining a higher price from the market. You're actually paying the farmer less by fixing a procurement price lower than the market price and buying it from the farmer. You're depriving the farmer of a higher price in the free market. That was the second argument raised. The third argument raised was it is actually fiscally unsustainable. You can't keep on providing higher MSP to farmers. The government is withdrawing from the economy. Government investment is being cut back. As a result, MSPs also, the MSP system and the procurement system also will have to be downscaled. That became this other important focus of these arguments that you saw in the period of 1990s. As a result, you have to procure less as a result. the argument was to procure less. Downscale Food Corporation of India. You can announce MSPs, that's fine, but that should only be to create a very small buffer stock of food grains and not more than that. And as a result, if you don't procure, what will you distribute through the PDS on the other end? If you procure less, there'll be less available for distribution through the PDS. So we should downscale PDS also. PDS at that time was universal in its coverage. There was no APL, BPL categories, for example. Everybody had a ration card. In my childhood, I remember my middle class household also had a ration card. So this system was, it was recommended that this should be changed to, from a universal system, it should be changed to a targeted system where only the needy, the poor should be provided food grains at a subsidized cost. Only the BPL household should be provided subsidized food grains, and the rest should be able to buy it from the, if they want to buy it from the PDS, they should be paying a full economic cost or close to the market price of the food grains. So as a result, what you see here is that the argument builds up in the 1990s to weaken the MSP framework as a system of support to the farmers. The argument is that you should let the private market take over what the government and the FCA has been doing all these years. Allow the private market to buy it from Punjab and sell it in Kerala. What is the problem? The private markets are more efficient than the public markets or the FCIs, and hence we should rely more on private markets. If not, I mean, you could go a step further. You can think of futures trading. You could think of different kinds of private interventions in marketing to move commodities from surplus to deficit areas, and that would be a much better way of the inventory management compared to what the FCI does. That was point number one made by neoliberal economists. Weaken the MSP system, weaken procurement, downscale PDS. Number one. Number two, come to the APMC, the second intervention that we spoke about from the 1960s. Now, the point here is slightly more complex, rather. The argument here was India is stuck with the production of food grains like rice and wheat. You are not able to diversify from these low-value food grains, which provided you food security, of course. But India should actually move towards diversification of the cropping pattern. Diversification of the cropping pattern towards what? From food grains like rice and wheat to high value, export oriented, capital intensive crops, for example, fruits, vegetables, etc., which using modern methods of cultivation. So this sort of shift, this sort of diversification of the cropping pattern was advocated to begin with. Now, this advocacy of the move from food grains to fruits, vegetables, etc. When people ask this question, so what happens to food security? What happens to the food security that we built up thanks to the Green Revolution? The answer of neoliberal economists was that what is the problem? You can actually export these fruits and vegetables into the international market, get the money, and buy wheat from the United States or Australia. What is the problem? You can, because you now have the WTO, which was signed in 1994 around, you now have a free world trade system. So you can simply export fruits and vegetables and purchase or import food grains, and you can meet your food requirements. So the old idea of food security as being linked to political sovereignty was not anymore considered a central or important feature of economic policy or national development or self-reliance in this period. Self-reliance was increasingly surrendered to the idea of free trade. That became the second important strategy. So you need diversification of the cropping pattern into fruits, vegetables, etc. But there is a problem in this. If you want to cultivate fruits, vegetables, etc., which are capital intensive, which are high value, which need the sophisticated value chains and so on, the farmers cannot do it. You need substantial private sector investment to come in this area, and that should be in the form of private, not just private sector, but also private sector corporate investment should come in. Only they have the capacity to do this. So what was recommended was two types of things could be tried out. One could be corporate farming. What is corporate farming? Whereby large companies come in and lease in or purchase 400, 500 acres of land in a particular area, and then directly cultivate high value crops and export out whatever they want to do with it. So this kind of companies coming in, purchasing or leasing in land from many farmers, building up 400 to 500 acres and then directly cultivating crops was called corporate farming. For this, however, there is a problem. Your land reform laws are lying as a big obstruction to this kind of a change, because land reform laws provide that you cannot possess more than a certain amount of area per person. So land reform laws, which are in some sense, which was the very important demand of farmers' movements from the time of independence, but which was never implemented outside Kerala, Bengal, Tripura, etc. Land reform laws were sought to be amended. The ceiling provisions in land reform laws were taken away in many states, Gujarat, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, etc. In many places, there was a sort of dilution of this ceiling provisions in order to allow private companies to come in and directly do corporate farming. Number one. But number two, where situation is not conducive for corporate farming, they said we could do contract farming, which is different. Where Mr. Baburaj, Sriraj Baburaj. Okay. So the argument here was that, sorry, I forgot what I was saying. Okay. The second argument was the contract farming. So in contract farming, what was suggested was, let farmers cultivate crops, but let them sign a contract with a private company, like say Reliance Fresh of today, Big Basket, Nature's Basket, Spencer's, etc. Let them sign a contract with them and let them, or in the Kerala context, Lulu is a major player because they also sell a lot of fruits and vegetables through their markets. So the argument was that these companies should be allowed to go directly to the farmer and purchase them. Okay, so that they can create an alternative, separate, independent value chain connecting the farmer directly to the consumer with very less number of middlemen, which allows the retail chains like Reliance Fresh or Lulu, etc., to sell it at very low price. Now, that is the middleman's price can be passed on to the farmer as a higher price or a lower price to the consumer. Now, this sort of argument meant that you wanted to create direct mechanisms of contact between big corporate retail chains on the one hand and farmers on the other. So these companies open collection centers in villages or rural areas where the farmer will come every morning or every second day, bring his vegetables, fruits, etc., sell it to the collection center at a predetermined price, and then the company would take it to their showroom. Now, this was called contract farming. This is also this was another measure that was suggested. Here is where, if in corporate farming, land reform laws were the obstruction. In the case of contract farming, the APMC laws were an obstruction, because the APMC laws of the 1960s had a provision whereby it was said that one APMC will have a jurisdiction over a certain area around it. A set of villages, so 8 villages, 9 villages, 10 villages, 20 villages. Sometimes it depends on the the density of APMC presence in each state. So the APMC markets have this notified area, which is their jurisdiction, and it is said that everybody who wants to market any commodity inside this notified area should A, get a license from APMC. Number 2, they should also pay a tax to the APMC. Okay, now that if the APMC demands it. So this provision was there in the APMC Acts of many states, which was seen as an obstruction to companies directly going to the farmer and buying, because they did not want to pay the tax to the APMC mandi. Now this was the context where it was suggested that the APMC Act should be amended to allow a contract farming, that is direct purchase of produce by the farmer, from the farmer by the company. And number 2, the creation of private markets itself. Why can't more markets come like APMC mandis? That was the second argument raised. So this was the context in which APMC laws were sought to be amended in states. But APMC laws are a state subject. Land reform laws are also a state subject. So what do? You have to tell the states to amend it. No, states won't listen, because they will have they have better ears to the ground. They will not. They know how politically sensitive these matters are. They know what is good for the farmers, because agriculture is largely a state subject. So the central government said in 2003, it said we are trying to bring in a model law. Okay, because this model law or model act, as they called it, will will have to be passed by the states in their legislatures, in their assemblies, which will ultimately provide amendments to the APMC Act, existing APMC Act, which would reduce or limit the notified area of an APMC, not to this large notified area around it, but only to its compound. Okay, only to its compound, or rather only to its principal market yard, the market yard, which is inside the APMC. Their jurisdiction will only be inside the market yard of the APMC and not outside it. Anybody can do whatever they want outside the walls of the APMC without taking any permission or paying any tax to the APMC mandi. Okay, this was the second, the other option that was put forward. From 2003 onwards, this has been put out by the central government, but very few states actually passed it. Some states did pass it, but some states amended their APMC acts, but just took one or two clauses from there and passed it. They did not go beyond that. So largely, the system remained unchanged in most states. This was the context in which, in 2017 and 18, the central government came with two more model acts, one separate for APMC reforms and one separate for contract farming, 2017 and 2018. This again, only few states touched because nobody wanted to pass these legislations. That is how, when the COVID crisis came in 2020 March, as part of the Atmanirbhar package, which was announced on the 27th of May, if I'm right, of 2020, the finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, announced that we are going to not wait for states to pass these laws. We are now going to pass a central law overriding the state APMC acts. Okay, so this was the context of bringing in three ordinances, one for APMC reform, two for contract farming, and three, which is unrelated, which is being spoken about all this while, which is an amendment to the Essential Commodities Act. I shall come to that towards the end of my presentation. Now, this is how the three ordinances come. The three ordinances were brought into the parliament in September as bills, and many people Viju has spoken about it. Many people demanded that it should be sent to the select committee or standing committee. That was not done. In the Rajya Sabha, the government was almost sure that it's going to lose the vote. So it sort of, despite the members of the parliament asking for division, two of them were caught on camera asking for the division, K.K. Ragesh from Kerala and Tiruchi Selva from Tamil Nadu. Both of them were asking for division, but the deputy speaker bulldozed them. That is, he didn't provide for the facility of division and simply passed it by a voice vote. The whole house was shouting no, but the speaker, the deputy speaker, announced the ayes have it, right? And that was sort of a complete mockery of Indian democracy was enacted in the last week of September there. I shall come to that in a while, but I shall now come into the major, the discussions related to the bill. Now they are acts because the president has signed it. The first point about the three acts that have been passed is that the central government has no business to pass them. Okay, it is none of the business of the central government to touch these legislations because they are exclusively state subjects. That is why in 1969 they were passed not by the parliament but in state legislative assemblies. Okay, and the central government has used a very interesting sort of clause of the constitution to actually bulldoze this. As you are aware, there are three lists: state list, concurrent list, union list, state list, and concurrent list in the constitution. Now, agriculture is a state subject in the constitution, listed as entry 14 in the state list. Now, this apart, entry 26 in the state list refers to trade and commerce within the state list. Entry 27 refers to production, supply, and distribution of goods. And entry 28 refers to markets and fairs. So agriculture is a state subject. Trade, intrastate trade is also a state subject. Okay, but the entry 26 and 27 in the parliament, in the constitution, they are listed as subject to entry 33 in the concurrent list. Okay, and what is the subject to entry 33 in the concurrent list? Entry 33 in the concurrent list provides the Indian government, the central government, with a little bit of extraordinary power to sort of override the state government in enacting some of these laws. That is the key point. This entry 33 or subject to entry 33 was not present in the original constitution of 1950. It was passed by a third amendment of the constitution in 1954, which was a very big controversy at that time in the parliament. There was a lot of eminent parliamentarians, including from the left, opposed this constitutional amendment, arguing that this goes against federalism in the constitution. This usurps states' powers by the center. But the center at that point of time said, we are facing, after independence, a very grave food situation. And this grave food situation demands that we get some powers for the time being. And the point being made was, we will not use it to usurp states' powers. We will only use it to ensure that deficit states do not suffer with respect to food shortage. That was the context in which this amendment was finally passed in the parliament. The Congress at that point of time had brute majority in the parliament, like the BJP today in the Lok Sabha, and that amendment bill was passed, but not without powerful opposition being posed against it by many eminent members of the parliament, including those of the left. Now, this is the historical context. But then what the opposition members pointed out in the parliament in 1954 came out to be exactly true in 2020. The same entry 33, which the parliamentarians in 1954 had said would be used at some point to usurp states' powers with respect to agriculture, was the precise entry that was invoked by the government of India, the Narendra Modi government, in September 2020 to pass these as acts of the center of the parliament, central acts of the parliament. Now, this it's unconstitutional in the following sense. This is unconstitutional because a large number of Supreme Court judgments in the past, particularly of a 5-member constitutional bench in 2002, the ITC versus Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee and others, the Supreme Court judgment in 2002, which examined a particular question, which is related to tobacco. What was that question asked by the central government? What is the question? What is the prayer there? The prayer was that the Tobacco Control Act, the Tobacco Board Act of 1975, which was a central act, had brought the development of the tobacco industry under the control of the central government. But the state governments had APMC acts. The state government APMC acts continued to list tobacco as an agricultural produce. So the question arose, if ITC, a company like ITC, went to the tobacco farmers and procured tobacco leaves from the farmers directly, will they have to pay an APMC tax? Will they have to pay a tax to the local APMC? Indeed, an APMC in Bihar state, called, in the place called Mongair, actually demanded about 35 lakhs from ITC as mandi tax. ITC refused to provide it because it said, I come under the Tobacco Board Act of 1975 of the central government. Why should I pay you? But the state government said, no, you have to pay because APMC is a state act. And you have to provide us with, you have to give us mandi tax. This case went up to the Supreme Court, and the constitutional bench ruled in 2002 that market fee has to be paid by ITC to the APMC, because the state APMC Act does not get cancelled out because there is a central act. Okay. It further argued that in such cases in the future, what we should see is whether the subject being handled is an exclusive entry in the state list or the central list. And only then we can decide on the case further. In this particular case that we are thinking about, this APMC acts that we are thinking about, or the contract farming acts that we are thinking about, it is an exclusively state subject. Right? And this is the context in which a number of states like Punjab, Kerala, etc., are exploring legal options in order to challenge the 3 acts of the government in the Supreme Court for their unconstitutionality. Okay, so that's a key point that we have to remember. It is against the federal principles of the Constitution. This is a violation of states' rights. The central government is intruding into what are rightfully the affairs of the state government. Number one. The second question is, we now have to start examining the different claims that have been made in support of the act, in support of the legislation. Are these claims accurate? Are these claims realistic? That is what we should be looking at now. Number one is, many states have actually already incorporated many of the provisions in these acts. Okay, if you look closely at some of the amendments that have been already done by different states, you will actually see that at least about 18 states in India have 18 states have amended their APMC acts to allow the establishment of private market yards or private markets managed by a person other than the APMC. 18 states have already done that amendment. Now, another 19 states have amended their APMC acts to allow for the direct purchase of agricultural produce from the farmers. That is why in many states, Reliance Fresh is procuring directly from farmers, or Nature's Basket is directly procuring from farmers, or Big Basket is directly procuring from farmers. These states have amended it already. Okay. Then 13 states have amended their APMC acts to allow or the establishment of farmers, consumers, markets managed by a person other than the APMC. 20 states have amended APMC acts to allow for contract farming. 14 states have amended their APMC act to facilitate a single point levy of the market fees, which is other than the APMC. Okay, so all these things have already been done by many states, thanks to Narendra Modi's great desire to pose himself as the savior of Indian farmers, that I did this great reform myself, despite the opposition by others, to create a spectacle out of nothing. Okay, that typical right-wing mentality, that right-wing political mentality is coming to play here to claim credit for much of the things that have already been done for about 1.5 decades. Number one, but number two, it's more important. Number two, it's more fundamental. There are a lot of states where which these amendments have not taken place in many ways. Punjab, for example, is an excellent example. So the argument being raised is the farmer is getting fair outside the APMC market. That freedom is important in itself, number one. Number two, the freedom will provide the farmer with a better price for his produce, because there will be better competition between private players and the APMC. That is the second claim that is made. Now, is it true? The fact is that this freedom already exists. This freedom already exists de facto. Okay, let us look at some of the government surveys conducted in the past and look at it. If you look at paddy, okay, 41% of the produce of farmers are already sold to not mandi, but a local private trader. How much is sold in mandi? Only 29% is sold in a mandi in the case of paddy. In the case of wheat, if you see, this is only 44%. So less than 50% of the produce is in the case of rice, 29%. In the case of wheat, 44% is only sold through the mandi. The rest sell through whichever trader comes to their doorstep, whichever private player comes to their doorstep, and they do private bargaining with that person, and they sell to the person who gives them the best price. Right? So this means that the freedom that is supposed to come to the farmer practically already exists in many states, right? So that is because our APMC systems, which is already there, needs actually expansion. In the 1950s and 60s, the argument was there should be one APMC within a 5-kilometer radius of a farmer, of a village, right? In that context, scholars have estimated that we should have at least 42,000 mandis in India. But we have only 7,500 mandis. Right? In other words, instead of 5 kilometers, the farmer has to travel 25 kilometers to reach the nearest mandi on an average. So only large farmers with a tractor who have enough produce, enough volumes to afford that kind of transport cost will directly take it to the mandi. The rest will sell it off in the village itself, because the transport cost is an additional burden for them. In any case, they get only very little margin. Right? So as a result, a large number of, almost half of the farmers sell their produce largely to the local traders. Now, this is the second point. So the whole point is this freedom already exists. Now, when the APMC is there, so the point is, so then what is the problem? So let the private market come. That would be the next point being raised. There, the problem is, when it is allowed, it will weaken the APMC system. Now, why is this APMC system important and why is it so critical to the security of the farmer? For the following two reasons. One is that the APMC system is extremely important in setting a fair and remunerative price to the farmer. Okay, this is because you have some amount of fairness, some amount of transparency. I'm not saying 100% transparency. There is some amount of transparency in the way prices are set in the APMC. There is collusion between traders, of course. There is exploitation of farmers, of course. But nevertheless, there continues to be some amount of fairness in the setting of prices in the APMC, which is certainly not there in the private markets. The APMC mandis also, even if not full reverence, will have some amount of respect to the MSP that is set by the government. They will factor in that MSP in some form while deciding on their prices. Right? While the private markets will have absolutely zero respect for the MSP. They are only worried about their bottom line. As a result, even if private markets come in a big way, this will lead to a distortion in the way in which prices are determined today. The farmer is likely to lose out in terms of the price that he is getting. Why are we saying so? This we are saying because of the following reason. Why is the farmer likely to get a lower price? This is because currently the APMC markets are charging a mandi tax. Take Punjab. The APMC market tax is 6%. This 6% has to be paid to the APMC market committee for over any transaction. As a result, the argument of the proponents of this bill or act has been that this 6% can be completely eliminated in a private market because there will be zero tax, and this 6% can be transferred to the farmer as a higher price for these produce. That is a appealing. That is a kind of appeal that is being generated around this bill. The farmer will get a higher price because whatever is being paid as mandi tax now will now accrue to the farmer as a higher price. Is this true? It's hardly true, because when the private markets come or a private collection center comes, is it that they will not have transaction costs? Won't they have to go to each farmer and purchase the commodity? Won't they have to? Won't they have transport costs? Won't they have staff costs, salary costs? Won't they have loading and unloading costs? Won't they have fuel costs? So all these are costs, new costs that will come up in the value chain if private markets take over. Now, whatever is paying, now it is known as mandi tax, which is paid to the APMC. But in place of that, what you will have is a series of transaction costs for the private company, which will be almost equal to the mandi tax. In some cases, it will also be higher than the mandi tax. Right? Now, in cases where it is higher than the mandi tax, it will be a loss to the farmer, because the higher transaction cost would mean a lower price to the farmer than he's getting from the APMC system. Right? So this, and a lot of studies actually show that transaction costs are quite high, because India does not have large farmers like the United States. If you need 10,000 tons of a commodity, in the United States you can go to less than 10 farmers and they'll give you that quantity. But in India, to get that kind of quantity, you will have to go to 50,000 to 1 lakh farmers, because most are small and marginal farmers. So the company will have to go to each person, grade the produce, weigh the produce, store the produce, transport the produce, load the produce, unload the produce, sell the produce. All this has transaction costs. Right? All this would mean that the farmer, whether the farmer will get a higher price or not, will be determined by the transaction costs of the company. And experience shows that these transaction costs are very high. And that's one reason why private companies actually do not come into this sector in a big way. Because transaction costs are very high. Most of the retailers, Reliance Fresh included, they go to the APMC and buy, because that APMC market provides some kind of aggregation. From there, you can buy very large quantities in one go. If you go and go it directly, you'll suffer costs. You'll have to burden the cost. Right? They much better prefer to go to the APMC and buy it wholesale. So this whole this whole question that we are raising, that is whether it will produce freedom give freedom to the farmers. You already have that freedom. Whether it will give higher prices to the farmers, unlikely. The farmer is actually likely to get a lower price because of the high transaction costs in the private markets that are likely to emerge. Okay. Now, the other thing is, why are these mandi taxes being paid? This mandi tax is a waste of money. The mandi tax is only reducing the price that the farmer gets. Don't go and make this argument in Punjab. Farmers will beat you up. They know that the mandi tax that is being paid to the APMC every year, the 6% mandi tax, which in the case of Punjab government comes to about 4,000 crores roundabout every year, rupees every year. This mandi tax is what is used by the Punjab government to improve the rural roads in Punjab. Okay, the mandi boards are responsible for rural road construction in Punjab. So if you'll see excellent rural roads in Punjab. All of them have been financed by the mandi tax from the mandi boards. The reason why Punjab is upset with this bill or act is that they are going to lose that 4,000 crore. Then how will they invest in rural roads? And who is going to benefit from the rural roads? The farmers. Who's going to invest in that sector anymore? Nobody. If APMCs tomorrow disappear, are these private markets going to do road construction from their CSR funding? You must be joking. Right? This is why Punjab government is against it. Punjab farmers are against it. Right? The larger farming community is also against this. So this means that if tomorrow the APMC market system weakens and private markets do not take over, because they are unlikely to come because of the high levels of transaction costs, they are unlikely to come. And if APMC markets are weakened, you will actually see a situation whereby there is a vacuum created in rural areas. This vacuum created in the rural areas would mean there will be anarchy, there will be chaos in rural markets. Nobody is in charge. As a result, all the protection that is available to the farmer will simply disappear. All the price security that is available to the farmer will simply disappear. The farmer will be completely thrown to the mercy of private traders who will take over the system, who will benefit from the chaos, who will benefit from the anarchy. Regulation will give way to completely unregulated systems. And the only person who suffers from this whole change in the ecosystem would be the farmers. They would be the only persons adversely affected. Right? So this is why this whole idea of private market, no middlemen, you will have middlemen. Every private company will simply outsource this activity of collection in the rural areas to a private agent. And those private agents will have their own costs, margins, commissions, etc. So the arhatyas of today, the commission agents of today will be just replaced by agents of the corporate firm. That's all. Right? Because somebody has to aggregate the produce. And that dirty job has to be done by somebody. Now the APMC does that dirty job. You don't want the APMC, you will need another person, and that person will have costs. That person will need commissions. So the mandi tax is simply not going to disappear and transform into a better price to the farmer. It is simply going to remain in another name. Right? So the whole claim that there's going to be freedom to the farmer, there's going to be better price to the farmer, are unlikely to be true, unlikely to come true. The last point is this whole argument is raised. So why are you raising this question about MSP? MSPs are not even spoken about in these acts. Why are you raising the question of MSP? The reason is that, as I have explained already, the whole MSP system is in danger. The government, under the neoliberal regime, does not want the MSP system, the procurement system, the PDS system to continue the way it does. That is the reason why the fear is there among the farming community that the MSP system is also likely to break down. I'll give you 3 points to sort of underline, emphasize this point that I'm trying to make. One, look at the record of the Narendra Modi government. They have absolutely no respect for MSP. Look at the period 2010 to 14, and look at the period 2014 to 2020. Okay, 4 years prior to the Modi government and 6 years after the Modi government. Okay, what has happened to MSPs? the MSP of paddy rose I'm talking about 2010 to 14, MSP for paddy rose by 9.5% every year. After Modi government came, it rose only by 5%, 9% to 5%. In the case of wheat, it used to grow at 7.8%. After Modi government came, it grew only by 5%. Take cotton, it grew at 14% between 10 and 14. But between 14 and 20, it rose by just 6%. Okay, so if you take the last year, the COVID year, that is 2020, okay, you have growth rates of MSP that are the lowest in the last decade, 2.6%. The Modi government does not think that MSPs are important, and the farmers know it. Number one. Number two is that the Modi government has refused to implement the suggestion of the MS Swaminathan Commission in 2006 to pay the farmers an MSP which is equivalent to 50% more than the cost of production. The Modi government has refused to provide that. As a result, on an average, across crops, if you see, a farmer is suffering a loss of 300 to 400 rupees per quintal on the on sale as MSP. The MSP should be 400 rupees more in many crops, 300 rupees more in other crops, right? If the formula is fixed as per Swaminathan suggested. But it is not being done, so the farmer is losing out. The farmer is angry because of that also. The third reason why farmer is upset or angry is because of this fear, which Viju referred to in his intervention, citing the Shantakumar committee, where it much later said by the Commission for Agricultural Cost and Price also in its recommendations to the central government. It says that every state like Kerala, for example, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, etc., which pay a bonus on MSP on paddy over and above what is fixed by the central government, should be penalized. How should they be penalized? They should be penalized by ending open-ended procurement in those states and not procuring enough quantity from those states at all. Thus, we should so the MSP that is paid in Kerala today is 2,750 rupees per quintal. Now it is being procured from the paddy harvests that are taking place in many areas. Right now, this will have to come down to 1,900 rupees. From 27.5 rupees a kilo, it will have to come down to 19 rupees a kilo. Kerala will be forced to do that. That is why states like Kerala are also upset, because this whole MSP regime has no respect, has no sanctity under the Narendra Modi government. Okay, this is another reason why this whole anger among farmers is out there. This is regarding the APMC system. I'm sort of coming towards the end of my presentation. I'm supposed to speak for about 40 minutes, but I think I've spoken for about 45 minutes now. I should close very quickly. The second act is about contract farming. Right now, what about contract farming? Contract farming has a positive aspect, to be fair. What is a positive aspect? The company is saying that in June, I'm signing a contract with the farmer. I'm saying in October, I'll come for your harvest. And in October, you should sell me 200 kilograms or 500 kilograms, and I will pay you rupees 10 per kilogram. So the farmer knows in June that in October, if he sells X kilogram of vegetables or fruits or whatever, he will get about 10 rupees per kilogram. That amount of price security is available to the farmer. That's a good thing. But the story doesn't end there. It has got a lot of negative aspects, lot of negative issues as well. What is the company sometimes or many times does not fulfill the contract. They breach the contract. So because during the harvest time, the company will see that the market price is 7 rupees per kilogram. Why should I go to this farmer, fulfill my contract, suffer a loss, and pay 10 rupees per kilogram, even though I've agreed in June? They would, given their profitability concerns, they will go to the open market and prefer to buy at 7 rupees per kilogram. They will breach the contract. Who is losing? The farmer. What will the farmer do? Go to the court and face the legal prowess of the private company? Hardly happens. Some people may try, but the company will figure out some way and argue that the quality of the product was not good enough, and hence we could not procure. And that's a breach of the contract on the part of the farmer, they will argue. And they will even prove it. right? So the farmer is suffering a loss. The second is a lot of unsustainable practices may be introduced by contract farming companies and sneaked in through, like, for example, very intensive farming and so on, where the soil conditions or ecological conditions do not allow for it. The third is this system of contract farming might create a cropping pattern which is counterproductive to the aims of food security in the nation. Right? So the nation, in order to ensure food security, will have a certain cropping pattern which it wants to introduce. But the contract farming arrangements will bring in a wholly new cropping pattern, which is completely contradictory to the aims of the government and derail the plans of the government. So that has to be guarded against. That is another problem that these contracts create. The other is there is this great fear that they will bring in new kinds of technologies which may lead to huge amounts of labor displacement in the farm. Thus may lead to high amounts of rural unemployment. The other question that has been raised is that comes from studies of different contract farming experiences. There is enormous exploitation of female laborers. There is an enormous usage of child labor, all to reduce the costs of cultivation and to allow the purchase of a commodity from the farmer at a very cheap, low price. Right? That is another fear that has been. So all these fears are there. There's a positive, but there are at least 8 to 10 negatives that we can list in contract farming. Most important of them being the breach of contract by the company and no protection available to the farmer against such breach of contracts. So you need regulation. At present, you don't have regulation, and so you need regulation. That's a fact. And that's a good thing. But the question is, does this bill of the central government provide that amount of security to the farmer? The answer is an emphatic no. It provides the farmer with no protection against breach of contracts from the company, no realistic protection, no meaningful protection. There are words used which where it cannot be done, etc., etc. All that is there, but the farmer it does not obtain full confidence through this act to enter into a contract farming arrangement with some amount of transparency guarantee, as you call it. Right? So that is not there. What can be done to address this? One of the things that has been suggested is that in every such contract, the local government, the panchayat or the state government signs the contract as a third party. Okay, when that third party signature comes in, the company will be much more hesitant to breach the contract than it is now. Because it will be fighting not against the farmer alone, it will also be fighting against the government. It would not want to do that all the time, right? So that component can be added. The bill does not have it. Okay. The other thing is, because the reason why companies are able to breach these contracts is also because most of these contracts are with individual farmers. So that is why an amount of protection will be required to allow for group contracts to prevail rather than individual contracts. Right? There is nothing in this bill which sort of gives a certain advantage to that kind of group contracts. The argument is that FPOs should be started, farmer producer organizations like cooperatives should be started, and so on. But all that will take a lot of time. Also, there will be a lot of geographical variations in the number of FPOs that you will have. So in some places, FPOs will be formed. In some places, cooperatives will come up and have group contracts. Indeed, they even have now already. But that is not going to be a normal feature. That's not going to be a widespread feature. So the balance will continue to be tilted against the farmer who signs the contract. And there is no effort to ameliorate the situation and to sort of create some kind of balance in the contract in favor of the farmer. The bill does not provide that. That is another important problem that has been raised. So contract farming requires better regulation. And this bill does not provide it. In fact, this bill simply leaves the area open for private companies to come in and do what they want, and does not provide adequate protection to the farmer to get into or enter into a contract with a private company with full assurance and security that transparency guarantees will be available, contracts would be met. Right? That is why this whole arrangement, the second bill regarding contract farming, is being opposed by farmers, because they would like better features in it that protect them rather than give open the area free for private companies to come and exploit them. Okay, that is about the second. So this is not an argument against contract farming. Every farmer has absolute right in our free country, as per a constitution, to enter into a contract with any company that they want to. Nobody can stop them. You cannot ban contract farming, right? You've done stupid things in Kerala, for example, banning GM crops. Okay, completely pseudoscience has prevailed in creating that kind of a monstrous situation in Kerala, where you don't allow even research into genetically modified crops. Pardon me, yesterday somebody got a Nobel Prize for CRISPR, right? Gene editing. Can you do research in gene editing in plants in Kerala Agricultural University? No. Right? That situation has to change. That's a problem of bad regulation, right? I was giving an example of bad regulation. Set that aside. Let's go ahead with our point. The last point that I wanted to mention is this whole question of Essential Commodities Act. Now, I know I've exceeded my time, but allow me 5 more minutes to complete this point. The key point about Essential Commodities Act of 1955 was that there were stock limits set on traders. What did the stock limits do? This was largely to prevent black marketing. This was largely to prevent hoarding by traders who will artificially inflate retail prices to make quick profits. Right? So, for example, there would be stock limits like 200 tons at a time for a small trader. And if he exceeds it, hoards more, and a government inspector can come and sort of raid the premises and can actually confiscate the excess stock. Now, the argument has been, particularly among neoliberal economies, has been that this is actually an obstruction to private investment in storage and warehousing. Because when private companies want to come and invest in storage and warehousing, they would like unlimited storage capacities to be created. Okay, not 200, but they would like 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 tons capacity to be created. Because you have this Essential Commodities Act, which prescribes small limits for stocks, big companies are not coming and investing in the sector. So in order to bring them into the sector, to invite them into the sector and invest in the sector, you should amend the Essential Commodities Act, and you should create a situation whereby all stock limits are removed. Okay, this is the argument raised by the proponents of the act, and that is the argument that has been provided by the government as well. The question to ask is Essential Commodities Act and the stock limit the reason why private investment is not coming into storage and warehousing? That is the question that we have to ask, because that's where the argument starts. You have to catch it there. My emphatic answer to that is no. Right? My emphatic answer to that is no, because it is not the stock limit that is preventing big companies from coming and creating a large infrastructure in storage and warehousing. Then what is it? It is a basic structure of our agriculture. You have large number of small farmers in rural areas who produce different commodities, right? You know, for example, the government has a scheme called One District, One Crop. Okay, everybody in one district should try to cultivate one crop. Okay, is that the situation that we have in our country? No, because millions of farmers produce multiple kinds of commodities. So the quantities are fragmented, the kinds of crops lie fragmented around, and this basically is the reason why there is absence of aggregation, that is creating big quantities at some point in the supply chain, which will allow a storage and warehousing company to come in and offer itself as the repository for that aggregated produce. Now, this simply does not exist in India. Okay, this kind of facility for aggregation does not exist in India. You do not have the homogeneity of the cropping pattern that you have across villages or across districts, which will allow private investment in storage and infrastructure or storage and warehousing to flow in freely. It is not the stock limit. It is because of a basic structural issue in your agricultural system or agrarian structure that is actually preventing the coming in of private investment. So this, unless this is taken care of, that's where the government is thinking about one district, one crop. Well, it depends on the success. It is thinking about forming 10,000 FPOs. In other words, one FPO will be there 1,500 to 4,000 farmers can be members of that FPO, farmer producer organization, or a cooperative. It will come in and it will sort of aggregate the produce of the farmer, and it will provide it to storage infrastructure, storage warehousing companies for storage. But that is unlikely to happen on a generalized basis. It will happen in some areas, but not everywhere. But at the same time, it is also true that you have a large number of private companies ready to come into this sector and invest. And the most well-known candidate in this regard is our friend, Mr. Adani, Gautam Adani. Okay, what has Adani done? What Mr. Adani has done is that he has invested significantly in storage and warehousing already. For example, in 2018, what Gautam Adani did was he bought about 40% stake in a company called Snowman Logistics Limited. Okay, how much did he pay? 296 crore rupees he paid, 300 crore he paid to buy a 40% stake in Snowman Logistics to enter into cold chain logistics. Now, Snowman Logistics is a market leader in cold chain logistics, with over 30% of the capacity among all integrated organized cold chain service providers in India. Okay, so boss has really thrown one ball ahead to be ready for that situation. What is Adani preparing for? Adani is preparing for the following situation. A, MSP system, procurement system, etc. will collapse, will end. So all that is being procured by the government comes into the open market. FCI will be dismantled. Okay, so that is out into the market. That is out of the government's hands. Second, APMC markets will be eliminated. Second act, right? That act will ensure that all the commodities that are currently being traded in APMC mandis will actually be out of the mandis and into the open market. So once the procurement ends, once FCI is dismantled, and when APMC markets are weakened, you get that kind of quantity that you want to deal with. So what FCI is doing tomorrow, Adani Logistics can do. That is the whole purpose behind bringing in this legislation on Essential Commodities Act. It is basically something that will extraordinarily expand the capacity and power, market power of big corporate players in the sphere, which will mean that the government will have absolutely no control over retail prices or retail food prices of commodities. Okay, currently it has Essential Commodities Act. People are scared to hold. People are scared to do black marketing. It exists, but there is a power with the government to go and prevent it. That power will disappear with this act, has disappeared with this act. As a result, government does not have any policy instruments in its hand to prevent black marketing, prevent hoarding, and to ensure that affordable prices are ensured for in the retail sector for consumers. That is the big problem with the third act. I've come to the last, I'm completing my presentation now. The point I was making was all the three legislations are part of the larger neoliberal policy program of the government. And Narendra Modi government has been pushing that agenda with much more vigor in the last few years. Particularly, it sees the COVID crisis as an opportunity to push for contentious neoliberal reforms in India. Number one. Number two, these three acts form in some sense, critical components of the neoliberal program in agriculture. Right? That neoliberal program means that you sort of push the farmers into the hands of big private corporate players, increase their market power, reduce the regulations on them or soften the regulations on them, and you allow them a free, unregulated, more or less unregulated sort of playing field in agricultural marketing to make as much profits as they would like to. This is the situation that prevails in the United States, for example, and they're trying hard to put in antitrust legislations against these big agribusiness firms to prevent them from monopolizing or oligopolizing these markets in the United States. We are moving towards that kind of a situation in India, where we are bringing our own Adanis and Ambanis into the sphere of agricultural marketing and creating replicas of the American disaster in agriculture. That is one of the biggest problems that I see with respect to these three agricultural legislations that have been passed. I have I have gone into great detail about what these acts would do, what the impacts of these acts would be, and I do not think that the impacts will be positive in any form for the Indian farmer. But while I'm pretty sure that they will be positive for the big corporate players. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take questions, if any, from here on.